All right, we in here, back at it for another run. Kyle Means here. Joshua M. Hicks, right there on one wing. Chris Pennant on the other. Three-man weaving it for now. But we got a special guest coming up in moments. Seth Rosenthal of Secret Base, SB Nation, and we're gonna talk about those cool videos that they do over there, and this mini series, I guess, that they got coming out on the 2016 Cavs, and well, I guess the Cavs history of the Cavaliers and their how it led up to their record, their history making win in 2016. Getting their first title ever and everything, but yeah, we're gonna talk about that and talk about some of the stuff we normally talk about here on the Runnin with WARR show, talking about the playoffs and everything. And lots been going on in the league. It's been a pretty wild 24 hours. Looking back on it, we go from talking about the playoffs and everything. We go and why am I hearing myself now?
I know you got the echo coming up. It's all good.
Okay, but we go from the game in Brooklyn, which was a hell of a hell of a change up in that game, where you saw the Bucks really jump out and grab control of that game, but all the while the KD was weaving this masterpiece of a performance that allowed his team to take that game in the end and take back control of that series. And we'll get into that in a minute. But since then, you've had coaches being relieved of their duties. We've had injury, big injury news, big COVID news, COVID striking again like a thief in the night. And it's just a lot of craziness in the league right now. We want to start off, guys. What has been like the big thing that has jumped out at you in the past 24 hours with all that's happened?
Man, the injuries for sure. My guys and I were talking about that most of the day. It's so sudden. It seems so sudden, and I think it's part of that for me because I didn't walk through the rest of the regular season. I know Zach LaVine was out for a while with the Bulls. Jamal Murray's been out for a while for the Nuggets, but it just seemed like a spate of things popped up almost all at once. Like Chris Paul is out now, and he's head of the Players Association, so I don't think there's any question, unless I'm wrong, as to whether he took the vaccine or not. It's just one of those cases that slipped through. Kawhi still dealing with that degenerative issue with his leg and the ACL injury, and then now the hamstring injuries for James Harden. So it's KD versus the world in Brooklyn, and some of these teams that you thought might have just been kind of playing it out with Embiid dealing with his groin injury, kind of like a latent groin injury and knee injury.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah,
I wouldn't have picked either of those teams in that series to make the finals, considering the way the Nets and Bucks were slugging it out. But now, Atlanta might be the team most primed to surprise some people and sneak into the finals.
Well, they're the team that's dealt with the least injuries.
Exactly.
They haven't really dealt with any injury issues. The Bucks have had a lesser degree. They've been the next healthier team, but they have had DiVincenzo go out, but he's not that essential to them. But as we've seen by their play, they've been too inconsistent. So I don't know, man. It's a toss up right now with all that's going on because we've got so many players. More than like usually in any playoff season, any NBA season, you have one or two teams that are affected by a devastating injury. But this has been more than any season ever, at a ridiculous level. I'm gonna quote this Malika Andrews tweet from earlier today. Kawhi he's marked as the 8th different All-Star to miss a playoff game this year. That already is the most in the NBA history. And Paul, if he goes out with this COVID stuff, would be the 9th. And on the others already down or been down at some point, AD, James Harden, Donovan Mitchell, Mike Conley, who still hasn't returned, hasn't played since the first round and still hasn't returned to the Jazz Clippers series, Jaylen Brown, Joel Embiid, and Kyrie Irving. So we've seen with several of those players how much their loss impacted their teams because their teams got eliminated. And we are seeing right now how the Nets have been affected by their injuries. And, Chris Paul, if he has to miss any time, he's everything for the Suns. And the Jazz have had to deal with Mitchell and they've had to deal with Conley. So they haven't been at full strength at any point against the Clippers. So, to that degree, Josh, people are already sort of mentioning the asterisk thing. And, I don't know if I would go that far, but, in your mind, do you think that we're seeing a less respectable process of elimination here, or are we just seeing I guess is this really a legit playoff series that we're seeing here, or is this just a fight to the finish? Like, what are your thoughts on it?
I think we're at the sign of the times, which is the NBA League now has to adjust from its normal traditions to make things fit for their players. COVID threw such a loop that it changed the entire flow of how an NBA season was supposed to operate. And I think all the injuries piling up is just the afterfact of what that change took place regarding all the NBA players being out for months and then going straight from there to the bubble and then playing a super intense schedule within the bubble. And then for most teams, especially went to the NBA Finals, you only had 70 days or so to prepare for an upcoming season with the draft in the middle of it, with free agency in the middle of it, and then try to squeeze in with no practice time, no real training camp, no real rest for the most part, especially for those top teams that we see are now not in the playoffs anymore. You talking about 72 games in a span of 4 or 5 months. I mean, and then to jump from there straight to the playoffs. And as soon as the playoffs is over, I believe a week later is the NBA draft. So it's like,
you're gonna have stars get into the Olympic Games too.
Yeah, and stars in the Olympics as well. So I think this is just the aftereffect of how much the bodies really took from the bubble all the way up until now at such a fast-paced rate that these bodies are finally starting to wear down. And it's wearing down to a point, especially if you have COVID combined with injury. It's taking players out like crazy. And I think it's time to where if the NBA wants to get back on schedule, they may have to treat a season very similar to like a lockout year, where you may have a little bit of training camp time, but you need to have a lesser amount of games with more space of rest in between to get back into the swing of things before you can have a full season. So that way you can limit the chances of these players getting injured on such a high rate, which is what we're experiencing right now. Answering earlier to your question about what impacted the most, I think for me it was Chris Paul, just because Chris Paul can never catch a break. He's been through so much. Every time, especially as of late since he left the Clippers, going to Houston and then going to Phoenix, every year is always Oklahoma City's always something. He's always getting injured. He's always, missing key games. And now that he finally has broken through, and even this playoff series with his shoulder injury, he's still he's still technically injured per se, but he's fighting through like he normally do. And now that he gets to the Western Conference Finals, a position he's never been in his career, now he may not be.
He's been there once.
He's been the Clippers, yeah. Clippers got there and then choked.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Well, no, twice then. No, he went there once. No. He went there with Houston. Clippers never been to the conference.
Right.
Oh.
Remember the game 7 with the he got injured for the game 7 and they missed like
with the Rockets, yeah.
With the Rockets, yeah. So yeah, that was the year that really he should have. If he didn't get injured that year, they likely get in the finals, and that was really really a tragic year there. I wouldn't be so resigned to tragedy for him in this situation unless we see, we have to see how this plays out in the next week or so. There's a chance, given that he had, like Chris said, he's likely been vaccinated, so he may be able to speed through the process a little more than had he not been vaccinated or something. So I'm going to resign some hope for him there. But I just want to get back though to the injury stuff, and not to be before we bring Seth in, not to be Mr. 20 Mr. 20 Hines, Mr. Was that Captain Hindsight in that South Park episode? I don't know y'all watch South Park, but not to be that guy, but LeBron is being that guy though as well right now. But I'm gonna get to his quote in a minute. But I think, like you said, Josh, that the NBA changing up at least for a season what they were doing, it should have happened this year. There was really no reason for them to play before, say, February. They played like 3 months of games in front of nobody just so they could satisfy the TV partners. And, that's really the only reason why they played games in December and January.
Well, let me ask y'all this right quick.
And I'm saying, no problem, Chris, but I'll let you go. But I'm just saying, the only reason they did it was to satisfy the TV partners. And what they did was run down a bunch of the league's elite players who, like we said, just played going into October of the previous year. And there's been no real break for these players. And now you got a bunch of injuries occurring to tendons and all these things where, it's strictly, we're not seeing broken bones or concussions, and that stuff is not happening to these players because the game doesn't allow it. But the game will run you down with your legs and your tendons and stuff, if you don't have any type of rest. And I say, just to quote LeBron, the way he went off earlier today, he talks about rim rest, and this is. I speak for the health of all our players. I hate to see this many injuries this time of the year. Sorry, fans, you guys should be seeing all your face. You can see on his Twitter what he spoke about in regards to, being able to see all this ahead of time. And you have to agree with him in my opinion. But go ahead, Chris.
My only question is, right? I think you said it already, but what did you expect the NBA to do? Not only do they have the contract I agree with you. I agree with you in that, but sometimes you have to risk something and you have to take leadership. If these things, you have to listen to your players. That's what LeBron is saying today. Even he wasn't being listened to in this whole process, and he was of the thought of in mind, and I'm sure many others were, that if we keep running ourselves down with only a month and a half of break in between, then it's gonna have an effect on the players and thus have an effect on the product and of the play and that we want to have out there. And it's happening at the worst time, at the worst possible time, the most important time, which is playoff time. So, but we're getting less in playoffs than we should, because I'm just saying we can't expect
that extra month and a half off.
We can't expect the money-making entity not to go for making money, and we would watch it. Like if the product's out there, we're out here to watch it. I'm sorry for jumping in. I just wanted to make that point. They're gonna go for it because they know people are gonna watch.
You're right.
If as much as they say that they want to keep the players fresh, they want to make money. These guys are meat grinders. These guys are little bits in the meat grinder. Even the absolute best guys are grist for the mill. And it's, if we want to, we got to remember that when we're talking about stuff like this. The Chris Paul thing aside, because I think that we're all chanting that if we just go around right now, and it's at this point, you can catch COVID no matter what. We
That's
all
why you
knew
still
that.
gotta be
It's just
vigilant.
trying to defend yourself the best you can.
Chris says he hadn't done nothing out of the way, out of line that is allowed. He ain't been out there coughing in anybody's mouths or tongue kissing random strangers and stuff. He's just been living his life, and that's a lesson I think for all of us to take. Like, in most cases, you probably should keep your mask on. Keep your mask on. You keep give people 6 feet and try to take care of yourself because this stuff is not over yet. But we got Seth here waiting. Seth Rosenthal, our special guest tonight from Secret Base, the video arm of SB Nation. Seth, man, we thank you for joining us, a first-time runner. How you doing, brother?
Thanks a lot for having me, guys. I'm doing well.
Yeah, Chris, we got to thank Chris as well for helping book this. He previously appeared on Chris's show, What's Good Radio. So I look, Seth is a guy who I admire your work. I'll speak in a little bit about what you do and with Secret Base and everything. But I've been watching the beef history videos and stuff like that for a while, so I've admired that. But knowing that you had a connection with one of my guys, I definitely wanted to get you on, and that expedited when I saw the video, this preview for this Cavs series that you're about to put out, and really interesting stuff too. I think I'm gonna try to play a segment of the trailer that you guys put out in a little bit, but before we go into all that with your work with Secret Base and everything, if you want, we've been going in on this stuff with the injuries and everything in the NBA. You're an NBA follower. What's your thoughts on this? Like, how, do you feel that we're getting a lesser version of the NBA playoffs than we would normally get because of this? Do you think this is something that could have been foreseen, or what's been your reaction to all this?
I mean, it's always a long season. We always get a worse playoffs than we could have. I can't remember a single postseason that didn't have one or two teams where you're like, if they didn't have this injury, maybe it could have been different.
Yeah.
But this is, I believe, objectively, like I've seen numbers going around about the number of all-stars that have been missing from their teams that have missed postseason games. It's worse than usual. And it could have been seen coming because people did see it coming. Katie Heindel wrote something great months ago about, I heard you guys talking before I came on about how like soft tissue injuries were happening more during the season, the kinds of things that result from wear and tear. And so, people who were chronically just putting more weight, more percussion on their bodies than they usually do, statistically, some of them were gonna break more than usual. And I wasn't inside the Players Association and league meetings that led to the season being played the way it was. But they agreed to do that. And they had to know that something like this might happen. And it's, I was asked at some point recently whether I feel like I'm being cheated by that. And like, no, it's not about me, but it sucks. It's not quite as fun when so many great players are missing. And that's always the case in the postseason, but this is worse than usual.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's definitely, it's hard in that way, being, like I said, we've all seen different playoffs play out in different ways. And, some key players miss out every playoffs, but to have this wave, like I said, never, an unprecedented number of all-stars in particular. It's not like just role players and stuff. Like I said with the Bucks, DiVincenzo, we could deal with him being out for the Bucks, but when you have, Kawhi Leonard being out and Chris Paul potentially, and Joel Embiid. Like these are the players who are going to make the difference. In Anthony Davis, of course, what his impact with the Lakers. These are the guys who really make the difference along this road. And I was definitely of the mind of thinking that the Lakers were going to pull out that series with the Suns, but it seemed to come down to Anthony Davis's health, being affecting that. And with the Nets, would this series already be over with the Bucks if their big three was healthy for all those guys? You can't tell that. You can't, you have to assume. And those are the storylines that we're going to have to go with. And Seth, you're big on storylines, you're big on history and how it plays out, and how certain subtle changes can affect so many things, like dominoes falling. And so many of those stories are told across the videos that you help produce. I want to go back to the story that was told last night. We got a little bit into it with the Brooklyn Milwaukee game, and first give your reaction on that, man. What do you think of the triple double, 49 points, 48 played all 48 minutes? It's just a miraculous performance. And it seems like the sort of thing that you guys may do a rewinder video on in the future, man. Do you think that might be the case?
That game was almost like Durant was almost too dominant for it to end up being like with rewinder. What it often is there is a moment, a single shot, the final seconds that subsume the rest of the narrative. So like this one shot went in, and as time passes, the rest of the narrative, this guy was terrible in the first quarter, these people were traded for each other a year ago, all that kind of stuff gets collapsed. Whereas this, like, there wasn't one game. I mean, he did hit that one incredible shot that put them up 4 in the final minute. But like, that was a performance. That wasn't just a shot. And I think when people remember that, they'll remember the whole game. But I should say, I need to admit that at the beginning of the third quarter, their Bucks were still up pretty big, and I felt myself falling asleep. And I was like, well, worst thing that happens is the Nets, have this like historic Kevin Durant performance that turns the game around, and I totally miss it. And then I woke up this morning, and that's exactly what had happened. So I caught up. I watched the highlights, but I did not get to see that live, and that was my mistake. Playoffs are long.
Yeah, we all have those moments too, as like, you wind up missing an all-time great performance just because you're sleepy, or you had to do something stupid that your girlfriend got you into or something. Yeah. We all got those stories, man. So that's what those late reruns on TNT are for. You got to watch out. About 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, they'll show.
Yes, because I'm getting old. I can't do these West Coast games anymore.
Yeah.
You're in New York, man. You got the 3-hour delay. We just got 2 hours.
10:30 tip off is brutal. Like when I'm a huge, I'm a Knicks fan, and when the Knicks are playing in Phoenix, it's not happening. I'll watch it in the morning. Can't even make it to the first quarter at this point.
Yeah, and we sort of got a little break with that this year because it's more mountain based, but they're still starting later. Like I think the game tonight in Utah is starting at 9. When it could have started an hour earlier. Like why they started so late? It's the only game of the night. Or it's the second game, I should say. Excuse me.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
We're gonna go back to tape delay, man.
Some people are worried that it will be a tape delay because of the matchups this year. Like if it's Utah and Atlanta, we may get a tape delay.
Oh, that's wrong, man. Atlanta's growing too much for that. There's too many people in Atlanta for them to accept that.
No, yeah. Well, you guys want to jump in on anything right quick before we go into the SB stuff?
Yeah, KD is just unreal. Like that's just the bottom line. Like all you can say is just his name, Kevin Durant. And he literally put into display don't disrespect my name and put me in the same category with Giannis. Like, that's what that was about. That was what part of what that was about. Like, 49-point triple-double, and at the efficient rate that he did it at, with not so crazy amount of shots and having almost 20 rebounds to go along with those 10 assists. Like, you can't tell me that Kevin Durant's game has evolved to a point where he's, even though he may not be the full all-around player that like LeBron, that people like LeBron James are, he's developed his skill sets to where he can now do some of those things at an enough rate that can help get your team to the next level, especially if it is necessary. And that's what we've seen tonight, or at least that last night with Kevin Durant. Like, he's shown that I'm the man now. This is my time. In a way, I'm taking the mantle from LeBron in these postseasons, and I'm going to make sure that, I am the guy that has arrived, in a sense, even though we know Kevin Durant has arrived pretty much for a long time. I think the really biggest thing of that game, though, was his draft teammate in Jeff Green dropping 28 and having 7 straight threes. Like, that's not part of Jeff Green's game. That's that when you say Jeff Green, you think about. But he was efficient, highly efficient from 3, and pretty much the only other player that really helped bring Brooklyn along over the hump to even keep them in the game, for Kevin Durant to take over the way that he did. So for Jeff Green and Kevin Durant to score 80 points together almost of that team's total and just keep this team afloat for at least up to Game 7, maybe. I mean, hey, that's with no James Harden, much of no James Harden either. Yeah, that's going to be a performance for the record books. That's going to be a defining moment for Kevin Durant that we're going to come back and watch and say, you want to know when Kevin Durant arrived in Brooklyn? This is the moment right here. And that's arguably one of the best performances between the Knicks and the Nets, that from a New York perspective, that's been able to perform in a playoff setting like that.
That's indelible. I was at the White Sox game, so I didn't get a chance to see it, but I watched highlights. I watched some of the game back on the late feed, and you hear the greats talk about how, in terms of defense, how they were utility guys. They filled in holes. Jordan and Bird and even LeBron, he'll pick up. Like, maybe they won't score in the first quarter, but they'll distribute. They'll get rebounds. They'll start breaks, things like that. When you play 48 minutes, you can't hold anything back per se. You can't leave anything in the tank because you have to empty the tank. And what impressed me most when I see those clips and the bits that I saw was him playing help side defense at the rim and altering shots and blocking shots and robbing Giannis in possessions where they needed the most, where he is the most tired, where he had the least amount of energy left. And all that while putting up 10 assists, 17 boards, and 49 points. It's the semifinals, right? They're not at the conference finals. So even the numbers, as staggering as they are, have to be blended somewhat because you haven't reached that pinnacle moment yet of the postseason. But you think about playoff triple doubles in key games. You think about Clyde Frazier in Game 7 in 1970 putting up 36. Or even LeBron with the 48 special that knocked out the Pistons in 05. Mm-hmm. And that was, to that point, that Pistons team was on the path of being maybe a top 2 team of the decade. Just the way that they smothered teams. They destroyed teams defensively. And young LeBron, put up 48 on them. And so this isn't necessarily the same team, but you have a guy like Giannis. You have Brook Lopez, who's still serviceable. And Chris Middleton has made his name this year, going off of last year. And the Bucks had that game in the bag. They were up 16 at half with a weakened Harden, no Kyrie, and just KD with the rest of the cast. No, these are NBA players, but it's the rest of the cast at that point in this era of the NBA. Stars make your team. And Kevin Durant took it on his shoulders. I think KD's always going to get a bad rap for leaving Oklahoma City. It's just the case. I still feel some sort of way about it because I loved that team and I wanted them to win because they were so exciting and They just flaunted their style. And then when he left, it kind of drove a hole into a lot of people's hearts. They wanted KD to be not only this new type of just ridiculous player, physically gifted, but the guy that did it on his own. And he's not necessarily that guy, but him doing it almost on his own last night with Jeff Green, I feel like for me, which doesn't matter, it doesn't matter how I feel, but it pulled back some of that feeling where I feel like KD can't do it when it really, if he needs to do it by himself in a moment, I don't know if he can. And this is, man, like you said, Josh, when he told the reporters, he's like, you know who I am. I'm Kevin Durant. And then he went out and showed people who he was in case they didn't hear him. That's incredible.
He's been waiting for this chance. Like, you know, whether you talk about him, you know, he saying that quote that he definitely said to Jay Will about him and Giannis. He tried to say that he didn't say it, but he definitely said it. But, you know, when it comes to that, or when it comes to, you know, people, we know the way he takes disrespect in general, you know, by the way he acts online and everything, and the way he's acted towards people like Michael Rappaport, who's probably the only guy who still doesn't believe in him after last night. And, you know, he's just been, like I said, he's been waiting for that moment. And he, you know, in the wake of everything that happened with him leaving Oklahoma City and the history that you give Chris, you know, so a lot of people will never forgive that stuff. But I think even going back to his time with Golden State, he asserted himself in certain games and showed, you know, the only thing was that he had that cast around him, so people could, you know, argue that, well, he didn't really do it by himself. But he showed himself in certain games. Like in particular, I think the one series where they beat the Cavs like 5 was a 17. You know, he was deadly in that series. And, you know, I always give him the biggest props for what he tried to do in the losing effort against Toronto, and when he tore that Achilles. And, you know, he showed a lot of heart in that series and that effort as well. So I've always been on the side of, you know, not questioning his heart and his willingness to devote himself to the game. And you know, I think all that came together last night, and, you know, really made for a historic performance that we got to bow down to. So, you know, give it up for KD. I think, you know, whether he wins the series for that team or not, you know, he has the excuse, of course, of his other two guys sort of falling by the wayside in this series as well, if they don't happen to, you know, if they happen to lose this series. But, you know, this, you know, win or lose, like, I think he made an impact for himself just with that performance last night. And I want to transition that into another guy who has not had the best of luck in the postseason, but I want to do a quick discussion, because I want to do this for a couple shows now, on his playoff legacy. And Seth, I want to bring you into this. I think it's good that you're here, because I watched last night a video that you did, a rewinder video, on his first big playoff moment when he made that game-winning shot, Game 6 of the 15 first round, Portland against Houston in the first round. I'm talking about Dame Lillard. Now, there's a great, like I said, great rewinder video. You can search it on Second Base on YouTube about that whole moment. And as Seth described, the series, it keys in on one particular shot, you know, and particularly in the basketball game series, and you know, brings all the backstory, you know, out from that moment, everything that led up to that moment, and it, you know, the video ends with that shot, that moment, you know, moment in, I think you guys say, like, a moment in history, you know, and it's really just very well done. Whether you know the history already or not, you get a lot out of watching these videos. And you know, I just it's interesting to me, just, you know, how so much respect and appreciation people have for Lillard. He has that moment in his playoff history. He has the moment where he took out Oklahoma City a couple years later and basically ended Westbrook's time in Oklahoma City, waved him off. And, I just thinking like when you have a playoff history like that, and even going up to this year where he went bonkers against Denver in the first round as well, but still just couldn't pull out the series. Is that a guy who you think has already written his playoff history because he has those two indelible moments, buffered by a lot of great play in general? Or do you think that he really does need that, if not a playoff, not a championship, proper, at least a championship effort, a championship moment where he actually plays in the finals or something? Does he need that? Or do you think his playoff history is already written in stone?
I mean, he's got plenty of career left, and it definitely, like you said, Rewinder has a tendency to sort of unpack this, but I don't get to define people's legacies. But what does help people have that indelible, tangible legacy long term is the kinds of things one would make an episode of Rewinder about. The very specific moments, the easy things you can point to reduce to sort of tokens someone's playoff career. And having hit a shot like that one, being able to turn your playoff career into images and memes and stuff, and him waving goodbye, and simple numeric achievements like the number of threes, like you mentioned, that he hit in the playoff series this year. There's any number of guys whose careers end without a championship, whose careers end even without having made it to the finals. But especially if they've managed to hit the shot, if they've managed to have the stat line, if they've managed to do something that's very simply communicated that represents how excellent they were in the playoffs, then that's a legacy too. I can, there's any number of guys who, I mean, for me, I'm a Knicks fan. Patrick Ewing hardly ever got to play in the finals, and obviously didn't win a championship, but there are very specific, visceral, tangible memories that I think even non-Knicks fans would recognize, because Ewing had some incredible playoff battles, some amazing series, and some really important moments in games. And so, there's a ton of value in that too. And like, at least in Portland, I mean, I guess things could get weird still, but Damian Lillard is a hero in Portland, no matter what happens from here, even though he's never had the full team around him. And so, I am personally not all that compelled by legacies, by that kind of storyline. Like, does someone count at this level or this level? It's games and moments and performances. And like Lillard is like I said, is maybe a little more than halfway into his career, and he's already done so much. And it's cool. It's awesome. I hope he gets to be part of a team, whether it's in Portland or elsewhere, that gives him a better chance of giving it his all the way he has in some series and then advancing because there are people around him. Because, the one thing about Lillard is that it's hard to point to many moments or series where the Blazers really should have gone farther, but he failed them. That hasn't really happened. He's just not that kind of player.
In most cases, he's been all they got, so it's been the opposite. They wouldn't have nearly got as far as they did without him. You could look at the year when they got to the Western Conference Finals against Golden State. Like, what else did they have but him in that run? But yeah, definitely. Josh and Chris, if you want to jump in on that, I want to mention too, like, we all know about this whole rings, culture and the way that this is permeated the whole discussion about players and all-time greatness and stuff in the NBA. And, we can talk about the effect that certain people have had on it, be it Jordan or LeBron or whatever. But, when you look at the history of the game and the history of the NBA, only a few certain teams have really, dominated every era. There's been like only a couple teams that really dominated that era and took most of the rings for themselves. So in every era, you have to have these guys where, like a Patrick Ewing, like you say, Seth, like a Reggie Miller in that same era, or going back to the 80s, bridging the 90s, a Dominique Wilkins probably, or somebody, who, they had their great moments, but they were mostly in those first couple rounds, because they couldn't get past the bigger, badder teams in their conference. Jordan was like that for 7 years before he broke through, So it takes a lot to build that sort of team that can showcase an all-time great talent and allow them to, have those championship moments. But just because you come up short, Barkley, again, we could talk about Barkley as well in that category as well, because Barkley is crazy because, like, you see his name just pop up, like, who's had, it happened last night where they were talking about like a 40, the triple double, a 40, 15, some triple double. And it's like, oh, Barkley did that. Yeah, Barkley had a lot of crazy playoff performances. So, but he, only got to the finals once, and he, people, now he has to, take those ribs from Shaq every now and then because Shaq got 4 rings and he don't, But Barkley was a generational player. So, you can't take that stuff away from these guys. And we gotta, keep those things in mind when we talk about these talents,
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, when you think about Damian Lillard, and like Seth mentioned, how much he has pretty much been a hero for Portland as a whole, not just on the court, but off the court. Like when you just mentioned Dame Dollar is just Dame Dollar alone is a legacy setter, right? Because, every NBA player has their own little side gigs and their side careers, but Dame Dollar thrived in that career as well as the league at the same time. It's kind of unknown. So just from Damian Lillard doing everything he's done so far, he's had too many moments where, that playoff moments where you just look at it and be like, no, that's Dame Dollar. That's Damian Lillard right there. Like his playoff legacy for sure is cemented, whether he wins rings or not. But Seth brought up a good point as well, where, I mean, if he moves out of Portland, if he somehow gets out of Portland, or Portland somehow brings him the help that he deserves, it could be cemented that much more because of the impact that he's had throughout the playoffs, going into these early rounds with Damian Lillard and Portland Trail Blazers. And you can even mention the bubble. Like the bubble wouldn't be as successful as it was if it wasn't for Damian Lillard going on a tangent, winning all those games and dropping 50-point bombs and 35, 40-point logo shots near the end of the games to bring the Portland Trail Blazers from literally a play-in spot per se when the bubble started all the way up until, I want to say, the second round of the playoffs when they played the Lakers. So, his legacy and his skill set and what he brought to the table for the Portland Trail Blazers as a whole is cemented regardless. But I really hope that he gets the opportunity to add more to that foundation, whether it is in Portland or whether it is somewhere else where he could actually have a chance to win. Because currently, right now, it's not working. And I think this is the first time where he has multiple options. He can actually ask to get out of Portland without any issues, or he can actually, be part of this new process where he could actually have a new coach for the first time since he's probably been in the league and change the direction of where this franchise really can go. So for him to be a loyal guy, I don't think he would leave Portland unless it's absolutely necessary and all the signs are there for him to go. But at least he has a chance to maybe change the direction and where this thing can go, with hopefully starting with this new head coach that they're looking into hiring. So I just want more from Damian Lillard, and hopefully this offseason, we'll be able to give him that.
Yeah, right quick, that's something we didn't mention. Like, of all the wild stuff that happened, a couple coaches lost their jobs within the past 12 hours as well. Scott Brooks out in D.C. and Stan Van down in New Orleans, and the coaching carousel is sort of speeding up. And I don't know what impact is going to have on the league, with these jobs, who fills them and everything. But we're talking about a player in Lillard who's not likely to force his hand any. At least there hasn't been any smoke in that direction as far as that go. But you got a lot of disgruntled players and disgruntled franchises out there, and they're trying to formulate something to get themselves, get themselves back in contention. You can look at a team like Atlanta playing now, who jumped it back into contention pretty quickly within a couple of years, and Brooklyn did so. Of course, they got the big three over there in succession, quick succession. But it doesn't have to take too much time, especially when you have a player, an all-star, an all-NBA player at your disposal already, in a Lillard in Portland, or looking in New Orleans, where they have Ingram and Zion at their disposal. Like, you get the right guy there, I guess you can make an impact quickly. But who is that guy going to be? I don't know. You guys got any thoughts on that?
Might not be a guy.
Yep. Yeah. Good.
My guy.
Might not.
Might not be. Might not be.
The time is slowly been approaching, and now the time has come. I don't think you'll see Teresa Weatherspoon in that role. Well, I haven't heard her name mentioned, but Zion came out and just said, hey, she's helped him a ton in his time in New Orleans. And I'm glad you mentioned the Pelicans, because I think it's 2 seasons that they could have and should have made the playoffs. The Pelicans have a lot of talent. They have guys on the roster who aren't going to fit on the roster when they do make the playoffs, but they got a lot of talent in New Orleans. And I was surprised they didn't make the playoffs in Orlando, and I was surprised that they didn't make the playoffs. Didn't even really. They didn't fade. They didn't collapse. They didn't make a run. They just didn't make the playoffs. So, when you're talking about Becky Hammon, who's seasoned under one of the best head coaches and front offices that we've seen in the past 30 years, and is a great player in her own right, and Dawn Staley, who is pretty much the same and is beloved in the coaching ranks in college and in South Carolina. I think that might be a tougher sell, having Dawn Staley leave, because she's put on so hard for South Carolina, and you still have to consider that idea of going from college to the pros and how we've seen that not work out in the past. But you got 2 worthwhile candidates for 6 jobs, as well as all of the understudies who have been out there. And I just peeped in an ESPN article that talked about guys who were assistant head coaches, associate head coaches for years at a time before they finally got the gig, and it's worked out. And Quinn Snyder was one of those names. I didn't know Quinn Snyder before he got hired in Utah, and he's taken them further than I ever expected. So there's guys that we probably don't know about that haven't been kicking around in our brains, and some player and some coaching candidates that we have that I honestly, I think that Becky is going to get hired this year. I really do. I think it's just been time. Everybody's seen her out there in San Antonio. The general public has taken notice, and if she's not at least in the final round, I would be shocked.
More people are calling on it.
It would be so cool to see Teresa Weatherspoon and Becky Hammon get jobs at the same time, like former teammates getting NBA head coaching gigs at the same time. Because I remember when Hammon was Teresa Weatherspoon's backup for a year or 2 in New York.
Yeah, that would be dope, definitely. And I know Weatherspoon, she's gone viral recently with that whole speech that she gave about, her background and, the people who naysayers in her life and stuff. So you think she'd have the whole halftime speech thing down, rallying the team and everything. So there's people out there who can do it. It's one of those times where we can definitely change some paradigms in these coaching ranks and everything. And even when you think too about some of the former players who are getting looks now as assistants, and let's get some newer faces and names in these positions, and do away with some of these retreads, or put them back in the assistant ranks or something. Scott Brooks, and so, I'm just
I like
saying.
Scott, man. I don't know why. I don't know why he doesn't work out.
I don't know, but he had. I was just hearing him talking about it today. He had his best season was his first season there in DC, and it's just been steadily went down to assist. They gave him Westbrook again.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't do nothing. So I don't know. But
yeah, I do know one thing though. I'm on the women bandwagon with this one. I mean, I think I know Chris. You mentioned you didn't hear any reports. I was watching the Jump earlier today. Thanks to working from home privileges, and they mentioned how she's actually being seriously considered for that position in New Orleans. They talked about how there's going to be more of a push, most likely, hopefully for African Americans to get those type of head coach positions, especially the assistants that Kyle mentioned that have been assistants for a long time, or you mentioned, Chris, to get that are more prepared for those head coaching jobs. And even in Chicago at one point, we was going through that process too, right? We had I forgot the dude's name already. That's really sad. But Unseld.
Unseld, yeah.
Yeah,
they talking about Unseld, like Ime Udoka.
Yep.
Yeah, a couple people like dude, and these names are getting brought up again with this cycle now. So yeah, hopefully they'll get some little Jock Vaughn and people like that. Jason Kidd, he's had a chance previously, but he seems to always raise up in these hiring talks and stuff. So let's see what they can do.
I'm actually for having especially you talk about in Portland with Damian Lillard, you get Chauncey Billups up in there. I'm a fan of them getting Chauncey Billups in Portland and what they can bring to the table, especially when you're talking about the guard play that he brings, the grit, and the grind that Damian is all about. Having that mindset together would be ideal for that Portland Trailblazers team. And I believe it was reported that Damian Lillard actually prefers to have Jason Kidd as the ideal candidate for the job. I don't know how true it is, but I think I did see something out there too that said that D. Lillard would be a fan of Jason Kidd being the head coach. I mean, at this point though, no matter what, especially talking about a franchise like Portland or a franchise like Boston, or where they have superstar talent there, you have to get these guys involved to where they can help see where this direction is going to go, because you're going to have to work with those players to get the best quality product, especially when you're talking about in the wins category. You need, and your superstars got to be happy. Washington is in the same boat. You got Westbrook and Bradley Beal. If you're not getting rid of those guys, you need to bring them into the table and have them with you vet out this process, because you're dealing with two superstars that in the Eastern Conference where they have proven no matter how bad you could be, you can still squeeze your way into the playoff. So you got to be able to, to vet those superstars. We're in an era now where superstars have to vet out those processes, because they are the ones that help drive this boat. And with the coaching candidates out there, and like we mentioned, 8 teams now and searching for new head. I think either 6 or 8 teams now that are doing the search for head coaching positions. With a lot of young prime talent out there from a coach perspective, let these superstars help you make the best decision for them and for the franchise moving forward. Because the better the head coach relationship it is with the players, the more you're going to get out of them, the more the team's going to get bought in, and you start to see the change that you really want to see in these franchises. And that's the biggest thing that any superstar really can ask for when it comes to them as a face of the franchise, and where they want to see this franchise moving forward when it comes to championships.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about all these plot lines and all these talking points that we've been going over. Like so many of these things were factored in with the rise of the Cleveland Cavaliers, and what happened, with them getting LeBron and getting a singular talent, and they had to lose him and then regain him. Then they regained him, and they went through a bit of a coaching carousel. They went through coaching carousels in both of his times there in Cleveland. But it's just a big epic story that it's funny here in Chicago, we sort of took it for granted because when we saw through the Michael Jordan era, we just saw them as filler, as a perfunctory rivalry, that guys we were able to sort of mush in the face and push them back when they had their championship hopes with those great, really great teams in the late 80s and early 90s, but they weren't enough to beat the Bulls and derail their championship legacy. But eventually the Rabbit got the gun eventually, and they were able to get their title hopes up in like I say, with the LeBron era, and eventually they got their championship in 2016. One of the most jaw-dropping NBA finals of all time. And Seth and his partners over Secret Base put together a series basically telling the whole history of the Cleveland Cavaliers and the drought that they were encompassed in, not just their franchise, but the whole city of Cleveland, and just the hard times that they took as a city, and a very sports frenzied town, but they weren't getting anything from any of their franchises for so long. And 2016 marked a sea change for them. But let's look a little bit of this trailer, which features the dulcet tones of one Seth Rosenthal. Let me get this up.
The new Velvet Fog, baby.
Forgot about that.
Seth, do you like listening back to yourself? You've done a lot of narration.
I'm used to it at this point.
You're used to it? Okay. Let me get this. Okay.
Maybe you know what's about to happen. We're in Oakland, California. It's June 19th, 2016. Game 7 of the NBA Finals between the Golden State Warriors and the Cleveland Cavaliers. Check the score and the time remaining. Barring disaster, the Cavaliers are about to win the first NBA championship in the 46-year history of the franchise. Cleveland fans have waited half a century for this moment. Before we witness it, we must give that drought a close examination. The Cavaliers enjoyed a miracle playoff run in their first decade of existence, only for new ownership to strip them bare, embarrass them at every turn, and nearly rip them from Cleveland entirely. In the 80s, this franchise got a lifeline and built the foundation of a contender almost in one night. But they were thwarted by the NBA's mightiest foes: injuries, bad trades, and that guy. Cleveland followed another miserable era with what felt like a gift from God, perhaps the greatest prospect ever, born and raised in Ohio, delivered by lottery to his hometown team, only for new ownership and weak management to fail their centerpiece, then drive him away. The Cleveland Cavaliers have died several times, victim of their own bad choices. Yet here they stand, alive, about to win a championship. To understand how much this means, we need to rewind. Like, really, really rewind.
You can see there coming up pretty soon on the 19th, a 3-part rewinder feature. A lot of goosebumps there.
Good.
Well done, I would say, on the trailer there. Definitely makes me want to watch it. First off, just what was the process in developing this, and what made you and your team over there at Secret Base want to tell this particular story in this type of sort of epic fashion like this? You mentioned as a 3-part rewinder. Rewinders are typically one video and about 10-15 minutes or so. You're doing 3 parts here. Are they going to are the individual parts going to be longer, or is it just going to be sort of like 3? Just explain. How's the process? How's the project going to be laid out?
Yeah, it's pretty long. it's a movie. It's like 2 hours long, divided into 3 parts. Wow. So the first chapter that comes out Saturday, which is the 5-year anniversary of the Cavs winning the championship. Spoiler: they go on to win the championship. That first part is about a half hour long, and it is, as I sort of allude to in that's the first 2 minutes of the first chapter right there. Kind of the preview of the whole miniseries. It came about because I have a big list. I have a Google document that's just like, these are the huge projects I would like to do if I had time. And I have a lot of fun and get a lot of satisfaction out of making the 10-15 minute things, Beef History, Rewinder, Untitled. But there are sometimes things that fit under those series, sometimes things that don't quite fit one of those series. There are certain topics that I would really love to write about, to do a review of, to cover really thoroughly, that just it wouldn't be doing them service to do them in 10 or 15 minutes. And something I've always wanted to work on was something about Ted Stepien. It was the guy with the glasses you saw in the middle of that little slideshow, who NBA fans nowadays know or maybe have heard of the Stepien rule, which is that your teams are not allowed to trade first-round draft picks in consecutive drafts. Saved the Knicks from Isaiah Thomas a couple times. But the origin of that rule is Ted Stepien, the guy who owned the Cavs for 3 years in the early 80s. And in those 3 years, ruined the franchise to a degree that basically no owner has ever done that quickly. So my initial idea was just like, this guy has been written about in passing, and like it's easy to find stuff about him, but I don't think there's been one comprehensive presentation about how unbelievable, like weird and funny and ridiculous and tragic in some ways, but how completely absurd and disastrous his ownership was. And when I thought about, it would be cool to make a video about that, I started to think more about that whole period of, half a century almost, where the Cavs didn't win a championship. And I realized that like there are sort of 3 points in Cavaliers history where they hit rock bottom. And the initial, the line on my big document that I now have crossed out, which feels good, and the original name of this project was The 3 Deaths of the Cleveland Cavaliers. And that's basically what each chapter is the first chapter is the Cavs started to exist in the 70s. They were an expansion team during this era when like the NBA and ABA were competing to, plant franchises in different cities. The NBA kind of rushed to get a franchise in Cleveland. They got good pretty fast. A lot of people think they could have won the championship, or at least made it to the finals in 1976 if it weren't for some injuries. But they generated momentum pretty quickly, flattened out a little bit, and then this dude Ted Stepien bought the team, and obviously his legacy is getting rid of draft picks. I did all this research to sort of lay out, like, if they had kept their draft picks, they traded away first rounders in 83, 84, 85, and 86. You may have heard of some of the people who were drafted those years. And they had already traded away 82. They could have drafted James Worthy with the first pick, but they traded that away before Ted Stepien. So that's 5 consecutive drafts where they didn't get to use their own first rounder. They could have had Drexler, Barkley, John Stockton. They could have had Karl Malone could have been on the Cavs. Like all of these people, I think any NBA fan, especially nowadays, knows that the draft is the way for bad teams, for losing franchises to turn around. It's like a subsidy from the NBA, and they completely threw it away. And so that is the first time the Cavs hit rock bottom. And then chapter 2 is all about, okay, Ted Stepien sold the team. They got bought by Gordon Gund, and the team turned around really fast. He hired Wayne Embry, who was a terrific GM, who had a really good eye for draft picks. He made a really smart trade to get Larry Nance, and all of a sudden, in '86, the Cavs just turned around and became what Magic Johnson called the team of the '90s. Entering '88. They all of a sudden, this really young, really balanced team looked like a championship contender. And then Michael Jordan happened, and Michael Jordan is sort of the second, like, Grim Reaper for the Cavs franchises. He beat them a little more easily in '88. He hit the shot in '89, and from that point forward, management sort of freaked out. They were just like, we thought we were going to be the team on the ascent, and the Bulls have completely ruined that. And they made some disastrous moves, the chief among them, the Ron Harper trade, which we talk a lot about. And I think is not particularly well understood in history, but did my best to figure out what happened there. But the Cavs traded away, their potential additional all-star, their guy who battled Jordan, they traded him away, when he was having one of his best seasons.
And then they wound up being left to call Gerald Wilkins Jordan Stopper.
Yeah, well, it was like Craig Elo giving it his best for a little bit, and then Gerald Wilkins. But even when the Cavs weren't quite as good, throughout the '90s, even after those '88 and '89 teams, the Bulls beat them like 4 more times. I think they were just a nightmare for the Cavs, and almost every Bulls playoff run included them just beating up the Cavs on the way there. And so that's death number 2. And then death number 3, we all know is they were maybe the luckiest franchise in the history of basketball. Got LeBron, the prospect happened to be born in Akron, Ohio. And it was kismet. He was delivered to his hometown team, like I said. And then they spent 7 years just failing him. And we dig into that too. And then he left. And that was the 3rd time they died. And then obviously some things happened after that, but the Cavs, that 46-year drought, I think the point of Rewinder is this moment's about to happen. We're watching it on TV. I'm going to hit pause, and I just want you to, before we see this, I want you to understand if what looks like it is about to happen happens, how much that's going to mean, and to understand the history involved. And I think for that, it deserved more than a rewinder. And so this is essentially the entire history of the Cleveland Cavaliers up to that point, which contains a whole lot of stuff, And so, yeah, it's a feature length, a movie length episode of this thing I usually do in 15 minutes.
It's completely fascinating the way that you describe it. And, it's amazing. It's a unique storyline within the history of the NBA. Like, usually with franchises, you get sort of a quick ascent or some steady ascent to championship glory, and then there's a fall off or something, and they come back, but like you said, there was multiple depths with Cleveland, and none of their rises got them to that ultimate place where they could really reign amongst the champions and the best teams of the league. They just sort of tasted a little bit of success, then they completely fell off and died. But it's just the way that it's spelled out and everything, the way that you really pinpoint those multiple depths is really fascinating, and I really look forward to seeing how it's played out on the videos.
There's one thing I noticed. I think it's the way that it's done. And Seth, I talked to you about this a bit on my podcast with how you got people together with Secret Base. You started, obviously, John had these long form videos and that he did with Alex, especially when they started Dorktown. And then when you really opened things up, when you had Jiajen on the videos, and a lot of the beef history, everything has its own production style. Like Beef History is different from Untitled, is different from Rewinder. But Rewinder, especially this one, evokes some memories and some feelings that so even see like the Generation Z, and even some in our millennial generation might not get, and that's like the Saturday movie of the week. I'm really like getting from that and some of that is just like the lo-fi value of it, but you get a series like this, a mini series. Like there used to be TV miniseries in the 70s and 80s all the time. Like that's how Roots was shown to the world. And so you had this idea of like, yo, we got to put the tape in. We got to make sure we tape Roots no matter what. Get the video recorder, because there was no you didn't have a VHS player, you didn't have a VCR. You could play the video movies and then you could record the movies in another one. And when you get something like that stretches out this long, that delves into this kind of history, I think not only does it really elucidate what the Cavaliers and what them winning meant to a city that hadn't seen a championship since Harry Truman was president. It also kind of takes people back and into that idea of like, let's sit down and watch this. Like you obviously have options. You're going to be watching it on YouTube, but it's still kind of an event. Like let's sit down and maybe put the phone off to the side for a second and watch this. Is that something that came from the group as a whole, or was that like bandied around in production meetings, or was that even the idea?
I mean, first of all, I hope that's the way people respond to it. I hope it's worthy of that degree of attention. But the idea with everything we make is that we don't want to waste people's time. There's a lot of internet video that is even waste people's time is too extreme. Like we're not looking for a quick answer or a quick story. I feel very fortunate to have a job where I have the luxury of taking the time to try to research something and understand something better than anyone has bothered to before. And I think particularly in sports and in sports video, there's a lot of good stuff that's conversation, that's analysis, that's picking up on the news as it happens and processing it quickly. And that's really important. That stuff's fun to engage with. It's fun to watch on TV. It's fun on YouTube. It's fun on Twitter. But we have chosen to do something different, which is to step back a little bit from the ongoing events and not worry about last night's game, but try to offer stories from history that A, are engaging, B, are evergreen, and that like hopefully you can watch Chosen 10 years from now and it'll still make sense. And also will help you understand the context of today. I think that something I didn't mention is that each chapter talks a little bit about the three most important players on the 2016 Cavs and how they got there and how that fits in Cavs history. And so what I want, no diehard NBA fan is going to really be learning something from thinking about like, well, the Cavs of the 80s didn't care about draft picks at all. In 2011, the Cavs traded for a draft pick and they got Kyrie out of that. Like the Clippers made a hideous trade, happened to win the lottery with, I think, a 3% chance. And then Kyrie got to be a Cav. And so that, the first chapter is kind of like, let's think about the draft. Let's think about what this is as a labor mechanism of, like Kyrie was this kid coming out of Duke who was, even with an injury, was the most desirable prospect in basketball. But the way the NBA is set up, it doesn't really matter who you are. If Cleveland's got the first pick, you're going to Cleveland, and Cleveland got themselves the first pick, and they wasted that opportunity back when Charles Barkley was on the board. And in the second chapter, we talk about, well, how did Kevin Love get here? Kevin Love got here by trade, and like trades are another thing where players don't have a lot of control. More so these days, but if teams make trades at the wrong time, you can ruin something good, like the Cavs of the early 90s did, or 89, 90 did with Ron Harper. They did it right when they got Larry Nance, and they obviously did it really right when they traded for Kevin Love, who then ended up playing a huge part in a championship team. But what really does it, and something that's new really in the last, I guess, 30 years of the NBA, is unrestricted free agency, that players can go out there and say, you've done it right. I am playing for you. None of these teams can pick me at this point. I get to choose. And LeBron's really interesting because LeBron experienced both halves of it. You know, the Cavs were his hometown team, but there's pretty good evidence that like he wasn't totally thrilled about going to the 2002, 2003 Darius Miles Cavs, you know, with Ricky Davis and stuff. But he didn't have a choice. It didn't matter. He could have went out and gotten, you know, if it were truly a free market, he could have gotten a $50 million contract, you know, before he turned 19. But that's not how, you know, wherever he wanted. But that's not how it worked out. He had to play for the Cavs. The second time around, that was his choice. And so I think, you know, what that third chapter gets into is what changed, you know, what went wrong for those first 7 years. And in the 4 years he was gone when he was in Miami, what went right for Cleveland, what changed. And part of it was valuing the draft and doing, you know, thinking carefully about trades. But yeah, having the opportunity to tell that story in depth is not something every sports media outlet gets. And so I want to take advantage of it and, you know, not only teach people the history of the Cavaliers, but I hopefully it helps people when they watch the NBA draft, when they think about free agency and trades, understand that, you know, that people fought for those things and that some of those things are a little weird and kind of unfair and all that kind of stuff. And it, you know, helps you appreciate modern day stuff without me having to directly talk about it.
That's what's up. I know we're going to speed up a little bit because you've already stayed longer than you promised. So we appreciate you doing that. But, you know, we'll try to get to the end of things here. But right quick, before we start to get to our end here, was there one tidbit or storyline or anything about Cavaliers and their history that sort of jumped out to you or, you know, was sort of an unknown for you before you did your deep dive and that really stuck out for you?
There's a couple of things. We have some pretty cool animations that we made for some of the better stories. Because I wasn't really old enough to be paying enough attention at the time, the precise way in which the Cavaliers lost Carlos Boozer is really weird and really interesting. So, you know, when LeBron got to the Cavs in 2003, they won the lottery. They were a really bad team. But part of that was that they had drafted really poorly, but they had hit on a couple later picks. They had Zydrunas Ilgauskas, who I think is one of two All-Stars. And, you know, we're really stretching the definition of All-Star to include Zydrunas Ilgauskas, but he was technically an All-Star. One of two All-Stars LeBron played with in his first stint in Cleveland. They had Zydrunas Ilgauskas and they had Carlos Boozer, who, if they hadn't nailed a second-round pick, which they did with Boozer, then LeBron really would have had no good teammates his rookie year. But Boozer hit free agency in 2004, or the Cavs allowed him to hit free agency because they basically made an under-the-table deal with him. They were like, we're gonna not pick up your option, but then you're gonna immediately come back and sign a long-term deal. And everyone agreed to it. And then Carlos Boozer was like, yeah, I mean, I don't know what was said in the room, but the Cavs were under the impression that Carlos Boozer, they were going to let him become a free agent, and then he was going to immediately re-sign with them. And it was going to allow him to be paid more. But he looked around in just those couple of days in early July, and I think he was like, Adonal Foyle just got a huge contract. I don't know if you remember Adonal Foyle, but like a couple of these like really mediocre big men were signing huge contracts in the summer of 2004. And Carlos Boozer was like, damn, this is more money than you were promising me. I know that we had this like probably illicit agreement, but I'm signing an offer sheet. And he went to the Utah Jazz, and the Cavs could have matched it. It was restricted free agency, but they were so upset about it that they didn't. And that was sort of like the first step, the first sign that the Cavs were never going to really, at least in that first stint, never really do right by LeBron. Because if you look back at 2003 to 2010, he didn't really get a teammate better than Boozer from that point forward. It was like Mo Williams, what was left of Shaq, Anton Jameson. Like it's really unbelievable looking at the kinds of rosters he was dragging deep into the postseason for some of those years. And so, yeah, the Carlos Boozer thing is something I vaguely remembered, but is a little weirder than I recalled. But there's a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah. I remember. Now that you speak about that, I remember some of the coverage at that time and him. Yeah, like I say, within that rookie period, because he, is being a second rounder, he didn't have that solidified rookie contract, and so they thought it was gonna be one. It was like the wire line. They thought it was gonna be one way, but it wound up being the other.
Exactly.
And he went out to Utah, and then of course 6 years later he's a free agent, and the Bulls buy into him, and we know how that goes. Head gets painted on and everything, and does a lot of yelling and not much more than that. But yeah, it goes to show you, man, just how, like you said, only 2 All-Stars during that first run for LeBron and Cleveland, and it was almost Herculean, the effort that he gave that franchise. So I guess, do you think in some ways that was this an aim at all to sort of recontextualize that first run for him, where a lot of people villainized him, of course, for leaving Cleveland that first time, and he looked bad, just really no way to mix the words, the way that he looked like in that final series against Boston, where he just almost threw his jersey down, did everything but throw his jersey down on the court and stomped out and everything. Like, was that in your mind at all when you were telling that part of the story?
It found me, even if I didn't, that wasn't my intention going in. My intention was just to tell you what happened, but I had forgotten so many things. We mentioned the 48 special earlier. Going back and watching the 2007 Cavaliers, who, that was, it didn't even have Mo Williams yet. That was just LeBron. And the actual, there's so much history to cover that I couldn't spend that much time sitting in one game and just going through it. But for that game, that fourth quarter and overtime, we devoted a significant portion of that third chapter to that, because that was one guy who was he was 23, 22 years old at the time, something. And the Detroit Pistons were, they weren't the peak Pistons, but they were still an incredible, and he just beat them by himself. Completely, we talk about what Durant did last night, and that was LeBron at a much younger age with a much less refined skill set and against just an outstanding defense, doing things that didn't seem possible. And I was in high school watching that, and to me, that was the night LeBron arrived. That was the night where I was like, oh my God, this might be one of the best players ever. And I mean, we knew that before that, but that really, in a playoff atmosphere, was that. And so, yeah, I don't want to tell people how to feel about LeBron, and things certainly got ugly by the end of it. And he didn't come off particularly well the way the 2010 season ended, but I think people watching the first 7 years of LeBron's career, and people below a certain age probably don't really remember it that well, frankly.
It's a while now.
It's a while now. Yeah, he's been around a bit. I think it's undeniable that on one hand, the Cavs really royally failed him several times over. And we get into some of the off seasons where he said who he wanted. He was like, please go get me Jason Kidd, or please go get me, anybody, just a point guard, somebody. Get me Ray Allen, get me Michael Redd. And they didn't do that. Some other teams like the Celtics, teams like the Magic, went out and got the guys that they needed to surround their stars with talent. And still, he did some pretty amazing things and was able to beat, whole teams by himself. But it's pretty damning to look at the way Dan Gilbert's, and Danny Ferry's Cavs just didn't really get the job done with him. And then knowing that, in spite of that, seeing how far LeBron was able to take the Cavs to the finals is pretty cool to reflect on. And I think it certainly, reinvigorated my appreciation of young LeBron, and I would find it hard to feel otherwise, but people are going to feel how they feel. It's LeBron.
Yeah. I got all the respect in the world for LeBron. I'm not necessarily here for the over mythologizing of LeBron because I'm still a Jordan guy. I came up over the Jordan. So, but LeBron is that guy. He is. There is so much that you can mythologize about him. But in the real deal, when you just look at what he did for what it's worth, there's no arguing that he is a monumental figure in the NBA, and what he's done over the past 17 years was. I saw something yesterday. The only player to make, they announced the All NBA teams. The only player to make 17 All NBA teams. So, he has so many things. Be they statistical anomalies or award notices, whatever. So many things that back up his legacy. It's amazing. But that 2016, that championship, the last question I have about this particular series, like, would you say that's the crown, that's the feather in his cap, I would say, or the main jewel in his crown as far as his legacy? Would you say that is?
I think so. I think he expressed that himself, is that doing it for Cleveland, doing it in Cleveland was a whole other thing.
And that was entirely why he came back, right? Because you talk about what Gilbert did and the way that the franchise failed him. It was entirely through his grace, LeBron's grace, that he came back to them and was like, look, I'll give this another chance because I want to not necessarily give you a championship. I want to give Cleveland and Northeast Ohio the championship.
And like I said, the series is very much a labor history of the NBA. And the reason it's called Chosen is that, LeBron was the chosen one. That was the Sports Illustrated cover. And the Cavs chose him to start with. And when LeBron, and that didn't go so hot. They didn't choose so well around him. But when LeBron came back, that was his choice. And part of it, people remember this, I think, but that wasn't his only choice. He came and he said, we're getting Kevin Love. That Kevin Love trade that you thought about but decided not to do, we're doing it. You're trading Andrew Wiggins for Kevin Love. You're signing James Jones. You're trading for J.R. Smith. You're firing David Blatt. Not only, I don't want to overstate. LeBron was not the GM of that team. I think that gets a little simplified or exaggerated, but he was pushing the buttons. He was calling the shots. If he wanted something, because again, we're talking about control and choice here, he was on a succession of one-year contracts. The moment he was unhappy, he had all the power and leverage in a way that NBA players, union members, even the greatest, Michaels and Magics of back in the day, they didn't have this power, at least until late in their careers. He had the power to be like, if you don't get me Mike Miller, I'm out of here, And he didn't always make great choices, but he was making the choices, and he won, and they won a ring, In 45 years of other people making the choices for the Cavs, they couldn't do it. LeBron got it done. It's a hell of an achievement.
It's fascinating, man. I'm really looking forward to seeing the videos. The first party save releases on June 19th, so a couple of days away. So definitely check out as Secret Base on YouTube is definitely the easiest way to find that. And before Josh, Chris, you got anything else you want to throw right quick before we begin to wrap up?
I guess aside from me being excited to watch this series, I'm really looking forward to seeing this. Just real briefly, you talked about the 3 deaths per se that takes place in this whole series. Is one of those deaths going to highlight the impact Dan Gilbert had with his letter and how he, came for LeBron and the way they did it and LeBron's reaction to those things? I wonder if that's going to be included in this series.
It comes up if only because it's very important to remember in 2014, if it's I even myself, I can remember I was in Vegas for Summer League and yeah, I guess June of 2014. No, that doesn't make sense. Anyway, in 2014, before LeBron, oh no, he signed really late in the summer. Okay, so yeah, I was in
it feels
Vegas
like
for Summer
August.
League, and I remember talking to a friend of mine who used to write for our Cavs blog, who was like, "I think LeBron's going to come back," and I can remember being like, "That is the last thing that's going to happen." So I think it's important to understand like how wild a concept that was because of things like the Dan Gilbert letter, because of the way Cavs fans behaved, burning his jersey. You remember the Cavs fan, I think it was in 2014 or maybe 2013, someone ran on the court during a Heat game and like went up and like touched LeBron wearing a shirt that said like LeBron come home. Like people behaved like infants. Dan Gilbert, the owner of the team included, about LeBron leaving, and it took a lot of rebuilding of bridges and of sort of playing on LeBron's terms and meeting with Rich Paul and dealing actually with some other figures from Cavs history. But yeah, the Dan Gilbert letter, I sort of think of LeBron leaving as the death, and I think Dan Gilbert's letter was like the extremely embarrassing eulogy for that, of him immediately understanding like, oh boy, this is over. We are not going to be good again anytime soon, because that was very much the case. But yeah, we talk about the Comic Sans letter in the third chapter.
I think the thing for me that is, first of all, the labor part, because y'all have, Josh and Kyle have been with me on enough of the shows to know how I talk about the labor part of this sports deal, especially in the context of last season and COVID and everything that went on. So as always, shout out to Randall Cunningham Seasons the Means of Production, which is just one of my favorite secret-based videos of all time. Me and my roommate will watch that once a month at least. But I hope, I don't know how much you can, but one of the moments that is not even really central to this, but the Nike commercial that is pretty much like wiped off of, they tried to wipe it from history books. And I feel like there's just a generation of people who are going to be like the last people. We're going to be like the Book of Eli carrying that. There was this commercial that LeBron did with Don Johnson in Miami Vice clothes. And I think that because not only was that central to LeBron's mood at that point, and his like transformation into just being like, he took the step. He became a villain, but it was like his transformation. When the Heat won in 2012, and after Rosen won the MVP in 2011, LeBron became a different player. Like he was shooting 45% from three at one point in the season, like 3/4 of the way through the season. I was like, there's nobody who can stop this dude. But that, and then there was a Cavs reaction to it where they just went around to various people. There was guys at a barber shop, some dude like chopping wood, and it wasn't weird. I think it was because, and I want to see this. I want to see where this comes out. Like LeBron was still young at that point, and Cleveland fans and Cavs fans had gone through all of these things that it felt like a young relationship that ends really acrimoniously, like what happened at that Boys and Girls Club.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that the series does not talk about a lot is LeBron's time in Miami and how his reputation changed, and obviously going on and winning championships. But it's like I said, I want people to think about what the draft is and what trades are and how these people who are the talent, they are the whole reason this exists. They have skills that are worth tens of millions of dollars, and they just, your career begins, your Zion Williamson and LeBron James, your career begins with basically no input from you. And on one hand, it's really weird and a pretty messed up labor practice. And on the other hand, if you're a fan of a sports team, you better hope that they make the best out of that, because that's how sports team, that is the league saying like, we know you suck and here's a lifeline. And so it's this weird thing of like, I'm a Knicks fan. Like I love the NBA draft. My favorite part of, because the Knicks usually suck. Like it's my favorite part of the NBA calendar. I get so excited about rookies. I love like learning about them. But that comes within the context of like, I wouldn't want to play for the Knicks if I, you know, if I were the best talent coming out of the lottery, I wouldn't want to play for the Knicks. And so what I mean to say is that, like, the way LeBron presented himself in the decision and during some of the, you know, commercial choices he made and things he said during his time in Miami, I think he regrets some of that. I think some of it was kind of tacky. But
you could tell it was him sort of being a character.
Yeah, kind of trying to play up a character. But then also, like, it is at least worth considering the lack of control he had, even as someone who was already incredibly famous and incredibly valuable to other people at 16, 17, 18 years old. He just became a Cleveland Cavalier. And then the first 7 years of his career were essentially wasted because his employer that he did not choose until he signed an extension, his employer that he did not choose did a horrible job building around him. And so, like, he maybe overreacted in the decision and he maybe overplayed that role. But, like, I can see why someone would lean so far into that, you know, into the ability to decide, into the decision and put a capital D on it and, like, make it a whole spectacle. Like, what a big deal that was for him, how long he had been waiting for that. And, you know, I'm sure there are plenty of things he would do differently, but the actual mechanics involved are a pretty important step for him. And I think in the context of all of NBA history, a pretty important step for players.
You can't underplay that. Yeah.
He made that thing, that concept of, like, no, it's up to me where I play. I am the laborer. I am the product. He made it a little bit more normal for guys to sort of be colder about that and make decisions in their best interests.
Yeah.
Because that's the way it should be. That's the way the billionaires do it.
Exactly. And in the end, I think that's the big thing when you talk about not only this impact on that franchise in Cleveland, but the whole entire league and the way that he, you know, just mapped out a new way of a new path for players in the NBA and maybe and throughout sports. You know, there's been some impact in that regard. So that's what really makes the story worth telling when you look at it from LeBron's point of view.
Yeah, I look at, like, a team like the Nets, and I'm not going to say this to hold this against them, but, like, the Nets only had a little bit to do with the Nets becoming really good. The Nets didn't go out and put these players on their team. The Nets had to prove to the players that they were worth joining. They had to, you know, go through these seasons of gradually improving to show, like, hey, this is a cool city to play in. We have a good staff. We have a good development program. Please pick us. They were begging, and they succeeded. You know, they did something right, and they deserve credit for that. But, like, Kevin Durant made that happen. James Harden made that happen. That was their choice. Brooklyn performed for them, but they didn't have the power to conscript them. And, you know, that becoming normal in the NBA has everything to do with what LeBron did in 2010, even if he did it a little, you know, the aesthetics weren't great.
Would that we could all have that same power coming out of college.
Yeah. I definitely wouldn't have went to Stevens Point, Wisconsin. That was the case for me. So, but right quick, Seth, what's your favorite bewildering Knicks first round draft pick?
Well, what do you mean by favorite?
Well, I kind of was contextualizing it as maybe looking back on it. You can look back on it somewhat fondly, or at least bittersweetly. I don't know. Hey, if they all are just bitter for you, I understand. But what's the most notable bewildering Knicks draft pick?
I mean, this feels kind of like a cop out because it's so recent, but people keep doing tweets about how, like, look at the NBA playoffs right now. Look at how many members of the 2018 draft class are having impacts. Luka Doncic, Trae Young, Mikal Bridges, and the list goes on and on and on. And the Knicks got Kevin Knox in that draft. And I don't know if I've mentioned this to Chris before, but, like, as a Knicks fan, as a lifelong Knicks fan who's seen some really terrible draft picks, some pretty interesting draft picks, but some really bad ones, the night of the Kevin Knox draft is the night I had sort of like I had what some people would call like a come to Jesus moment of just like I was so angry that the Knicks drafted Kevin Knox that I lay in my bed that night like I need to not take this so seriously. I need to like it's time to you're a Knicks fan, you're always going to care about the team, but it's time to grow up. You can't be this upset about Kevin Knox. They're going to keep hurting you. But I was right. I was right.
That's a great. I've had that moment with the Bears and the Bulls. I've had those moments with both of those teams, and at some point, you just like, yeah, I can't let these teams do this to me. I have, for my own mental health, I got to grow up and not let it affect me so much. I love how you said that, man. Yeah. So Kevin Knox. So you won't be you'll be pretty rejoicing pretty much when they do let him go.
Nothing against Kevin Knox. He's probably maybe an NBA player, but
probably
he was a bad lottery pick. I think we can all agree.
What were your thoughts on this year's Knicks team, right quick?
This year's Knicks team was the most fun I've had watching the Knicks in my adulthood. And, it was a year where I spent a lot of time with nothing else to do except sit inside and watch basketball. And so I remember, when the season started, it was like, well, I guess the Knicks are here now. Like, my favorite TV show is back. I don't particularly like it, but like, at least it's something else to pay attention to. And I was so surprised, so pleasantly blown away by how exciting it was to watch them. I don't want to overstate the emotions involved, but the season that Julius Randle had this year, like, meant a lot to me. I've never seen that happen with the Knicks for a player who, during their Knicks career to turn it around like that and to improve that much. And for it to, I don't know, this sounds dumb, but for it to happen during a pandemic when I was just so bummed about everything else, like, yeah, Julius Randle having this great year, the Knicks having this surprise playoff season, it doesn't matter, but I needed something to distract myself. We all did. And I just wasn't expecting the Knicks, who out of the last 20 years have had 1 or 2 good seasons. I wasn't expecting the Knicks to be the thing that, like, I could turn my brain off for 2 hours and be pleasantly entertained for a little bit. Just based on precedent, I wasn't expecting the Knicks to be that, and they really were. And it meant a lot to me. And the playoffs were miserable, but like they didn't wipe away the memory of how amazing that regular season was.
And see, those are the special things about riding with teams. Like, even when you reach that beyond point where it's like, I'm not going to be my 13-year-old self crying over these teams anymore when they suck. But when you stay with them and they do have these surprising seasons, they can still feel rewarding even as an adult. Like, it's meaningful, especially when you add, other context to it, like the times that we're living in and stuff. It's meaningful. So I'm glad that you felt that way. And we're still holding out for the Bulls. So hopefully we can join you guys in the playoffs. And it's funny too, because you guys did it with like a third of the team being former Bulls. So just
yeah, it's true.
But with what you guys got built there, as far as the management, at least the guys calling the shots from Thibodeau to Worldwide West and what's the
Leon Rose,
yeah. Do you think you guys are going to be able to maintain something going forward, or was it going to be another flash like when Carmelo came through and then you guys had that couple years and then you just went back to sinking?
The thing is, like, unlike that 2013 season, like, they really should. I can't say I'm totally convinced that Leon Rose and company are gonna follow the right course, that they're gonna make the best considered decisions. But the Knicks have, I think, the second lowest payroll in basketball right now. And they made they were the 4th seed in the playoffs. They have a guy who's turned into, maybe if he's not always going to be second team all NBA, maybe if he's going to regress a little bit, that's fine. But Julius Randle's a guy that they can build around. They have young players. They have their draft picks, and they have a ton of cap space by free agency, by trade, by using those picks. They should be able to take a pretty okay team and make it pretty good. And, they have everything a team would want to improve, and then they already have proven that they're able to win. So, like you mentioned, the Melo seasons, like that was a team built out of, it was Melo, it was Mike Woodson coaching in a way that he wasn't totally comfortable with. It was a lot of really old guys. They were depending on Jason Kidd, who was on the tournament, and Pablo Prigioni and Kurt Thomas and a bunch of dudes from foreign leagues. It was a really weird, fluky team. The Knicks might not improve that much from here. And, there's the Thibodeau factor where like they kind of juiced, 5 to 10 extra wins by simply playing their starters every single minute of every game. But like,
right.
This is at least a decent team that they have, and they have literally every tool. We talked about how you build a team when we're talking about Chosen. It's drafts, trades, free agency. All of that is available to them, basically more than any other team in the NBA. So if they know what they're doing, they should get pretty good. Can't prove that they know what they're doing, but like unlike prior seasons, they are good and they have every avenue available to get better. But we'll see.
I wish the best for you guys. So,
it's funny still being in a place where people like want the best for Knicks fans.
Well, my last question, man, before we head out, because Chris did a good, mention a bit of your history over there. And I still I want to bring you back actually and talk more about the foundation and the development of Secret Base and how it came from, just being another thing under SB Nation to being what it's become. But and talk, like I say, you guys got so much talent over there. People like John Boys and Alex Rubenstein and stuff like that, and people who really made an impact through these videos and through social media and stuff like that. But I got really hooked on you guys and stuff through the beef history, and that was with you were primarily doing that. Now you sort of, it seems like you sort of handed that off to Clara Morris. Shout out to her. But are you going to get back into those videos at any point, or are you sort of through with those?
I'm definitely still doing those. I was producing scripts at a slower rate than usual over the last 10 months or so because I was working on this gigantic Cavaliers future. But in fact, I got a beef history coming. Joe Ali, who's another person we didn't mention, who's terrific young talent at Secret Base, who's editing and writing his own scripts and producing, is awesome. But I wrote something that he's editing right now, a beef history about Tony La Russa and Dusty Baker.
Yes. Oh my God. That Cards Reds fight in 2012.
Yeah, a little Chicago action too. So
yeah.
Cardinals. I'm still doing it, and in fact, got one that's kind of in your guys' wheelhouse coming soon.
Okay, definitely gonna look forward to that. And my very last question is that most of your beef histories deal with the NBA. That you've done them in every sport, but I just want to get your thoughts on what makes the NBA so particularly fertile to manifest like these one-on-one beefs between players and stuff. What in your mind makes that the case?
Well, I'll give you a practical answer and an NBA answer. The practical answer is that I'm the guy who did most of the beef history. I start, obviously a lot more people are doing it now, and I like the NBA the best. So most of the beef history is about the NBA.
Okay, sure.
But I think the sport itself, I think you don't have that many players on the floor at a time. I think that's honestly a big part of it. It's 5-on-5. It's really close. You play each other multiple times a season. You play 7-game playoff series. It's not like the NFL where it's one and done to move, or college sports where it's one and done. You really get to know people in the NBA. And then I think on top of that, there's a ton of player movement in the NBA. So there's a lot of opportunities for people who were once teammates to be rivals, or vice versa. There's a lot of opportunities for a coach to coach the same player multiple times. There's just a lot more sort of chaos and a lot more variation in people's relationships. But I do think the main thing, and part of what endears me to the NBA, is that you really know everybody. Everybody's out there. They're not wearing a helmet and pads. They're not one of 11 guys on the field or 12 guys. It's 5-on-5 up close. Everybody can see you on TV. You know, if you're playing multiple nights a week, it's just like there's a lot of material. There's a lot. When I go back and do research, people are quoted 3 or 4 times a week. People have to it's just, there's a lot. And I think you spin the wheel enough times, some people are going to dislike each other. And I think the NBA sort of just like spins the wheel a lot in a way other sports don't, because the schedules are shorter or the teams are a little more, you know, have more people. The NBA really puts you into it.
And it brings about just some of the best surreal things that could happen. Like I love the videos and going back over certain histories and stuff, things that I may remember, but certain things that I may not have remembered or may not have seen the coverage from certain cities and stuff. Or like I was younger and just went like, you know, pre-internet stuff, pre-social media stuff, like a couple of the beef histories that stand out to me, or like the Deshaun Stevenson, who was he beefing with?
LeBron James.
LeBron,
Yeah.
LeBron James. Yeah, LeBron. Yeah. LeBron, and you have the Jay-Z diss and everything that goes involved. Like that was a great one. And another one is the trio in Dallas when they were beefing, and you had the fake God, what's this? Tony Braxton's rumors involved with that. Like you only get that stuff in the NBA. Like that's it's just surreal stories when it gets surreal like that, or you have the whole like the thing with Shaq and David Robinson where Shaq makes up the story about David Robinson dissing him as a kid, and you know, like stuff like that. That's what I really love about these beef histories that you unearth, the histories that you unearth in these stories and stuff. It's really great stuff. So I really, if you haven't watched any of these videos, definitely go to Secret Base on YouTube and check them out. I think if you love the NBA, if you love the history of the NBA, you'll get into those beef histories pretty quickly. And there's so many other types of videos out of series where Rewinder, Untitled, Seth has mentioned, and you know, a lot of the Dorktown videos, like those really in-depth, you know, deep dives into certain peculiar things that have to do with sports, like nerdy, you know, for lack of a better word,
it's
nerdy. It is. But you know,
it's called Dorktown.
But you really can go down some rabbit holes with some of the stuff that you guys throw out there, and I really love it. So definitely, really appreciate you coming on, Seth, man, and you know, really great. Have enjoyed talking to you, and wish you the best on your future projects, man, with Secret Base. Like I said, we love to have you back on and talk more about the process and everything over there. But you know, in the meantime, man, let people know, you know, how they can follow you or follow any other, you know, work that you do and stuff.
It's Secret Base is the name of the Twitter handle and the YouTube channel. The first chapter of Chosen premieres Saturday, June 19th, and then there will be 2 more later in the summer. I think early and then mid-July. And you don't need to follow me on Twitter. That's fine. Leave me alone.
It's easy to say when you got about 30,000 followers. I say the same thing though too.
But yeah, I really appreciate you guys having me. This was a lot of fun. I would love to come back.
Thank you, man. Appreciate you, man. Josh, Chris, you got anything else you want to say before we head out? Of course, you could drop your things, drop your social media and everything. Feel free.
Follow me. I crave attention. Need that. I've been talking to my therapist about that. No, Quandary Kitten, KWANDARY Kitten on Twitter, and there'll be more What's Good radios coming out soon, with people from every corner of the country. So.
Yes, sir. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram, Josh M Hicks Media. Working on now. It's an off season for me from a work perspective. So now I'm trying to do some more writing, get back into the swing of things. So hopefully we'll see some things coming out pretty soon. Be on the lookout for that. And I don't mind you following me on Instagram and Twitter. I like the interaction. So by all means, hit your brother up, and I'll probably do my best to somewhat follow back.
I like new followers too, but Seth followed me today, so he has a reason to follow me, and I have a reason to follow him. So
can you make an exception for us, Seth? I mean, I'm one of the lone ones out here out of this group, so therefore I would appreciate if you follow me back.
Oh wow,
I'm following everybody. Absolutely.
Right, you gonna put them on. You gonna put them on blast now, John.
I'm just trying to join the group. That's all. I'm just trying to join the group, man.
Yeah, you heard John. You heard Seth say you don't want nobody to follow. No, but no, that's it though for now, man. This is another great session running with WARR. Like we said, man, follow. If you don't follow Seth, follow Secret Base, and definitely check out those videos and all the great stuff they got going. And keep following us. I want you to definitely follow this show and follow. And keep up with what we're doing. We should have another show on Friday. Me and Josh, we got a guest that we were put back we're going to have last week. We're going to try to have him on this Friday. Landon Buford. He should be joining us, talk about some Dallas Mavericks related stuff. There's been some flickers of controversy breaking out from down that way. So we should be talking about that and some other playoff related stuff. The latest that's going on, of course, Game 6 from Milwaukee and Brooklyn will be on Thursday, so we're definitely gonna be reacting to that as well. So yeah, we're gonna keep it going. One of the most wonderful times of the year, NBA playoff season. We keep riding with us, and we go give you all that we can as far as news and perspective on these great games. No matter how many people legs fall off, we'll try to keep up with what's going on. So hopefully it won't be too many more injuries affecting this playoffs. But anyway, in the meantime, Seth, Chris, Josh, for you, appreciate you guys. I'm Kyle. And as we say at the end of every show, keep bouncing.